The prayers on. Welcome everyone to tonight's class. Let's go ahead and start with the prayers, and Jana, you'll be happy to lead us again.
To the founder,
The endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
short mandala offering. This ground is anointed
with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with mountain, four continents, the sun and moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala
Refuge in bodhicitta we'll do once in English and twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Chodam Lao Janju Varu Dagi Suchi Yagi Chunyan Ye Pe Sonam Gi Drola and Cheer Sangye Puharsho Sangye Chodam Soki Chodam Lao Janju Varu Dagi Suchi Dagi Chunyan Ge Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Puharsho.
So again, welcome everyone to tonight's class. Let's start with a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to come into this space and focus our minds a bit. And we'll do that by just meditating on the breath for a while. So again, whatever technique that you prefer to use with your breath, just bring the awareness to the breath and try to keep it there. So we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I will come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And we can recall these three levels of motivation that the Buddha taught, the three things that we can accomplish. We want to set our aim on each of these, one after the other, kind of building our motivation, making it more vast. And of course, we start with the acknowledgement that this life that we have is not going to last. Death will come. And we need to be assured that we can continue our spiritual development, that we can have ideal conditions, just like in this life, to be able to meet with these teachings and practice them. So the first level of motivation is to seek that state of high status, having a good rebirth, especially one in this human realm where we have the ability to practice the Dharma well. So start with setting your motivation there, really wanting this for yourself, seeing that death is inevitable, and we want to be assured of having a good rebirth when this life comes to an end. Then we develop the deeper motivation that is for the ultimate goal of being free from the rounds of samsara, free from having to take rebirth, free from being under the control of karma and delusions. And the Buddha taught the path that leads to that liberation. And it's a goal that we should all try to attain, not that we'll necessarily stop there, but we need to have our sights set on something that goes beyond samsara, to the realm of nirvana, the state of peace that we all can attain. So set that level of motivation, thinking that you're also here for your own individual liberation, for your own freedom from all of samsara, all the suffering, dissatisfaction, and the attainment of that state of bliss that is the peace of nirvana. But even if we were to attain that state, it's not our full potential. There's an even more blissful and ideal state, the state of Buddhahood. And of course, here we generate the concern for others who are in the same predicament as ourselves, expanding our motivation to go beyond our own welfare and to think about helping other sentient beings to achieve their greatest potential. This is the motivation of loving kindness and compassion that embraces all beings with the wish to lead them to happiness and to free them from all suffering. And then within that, the second aspiration, the aspiration to become enlightened ourselves so we can accomplish that completely. And this is bodhicitta, the greatest motivation we can bring to these teachings. That aspiration to develop ourselves completely, so we then are in the perfect position to help others, to guide them on their path of awakening. So try to bring that deepest and most profound and most powerful motivation to tonight's class. You can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. Okay, so again, we're working with this text by Nagarjuna that was written to one of his friends who was a king. And within his duties as a king, Nagarjuna is trying to address the sorts of practices and things that the king needs to be attentive to. Might mention that this isn't the only text that Nagarjuna wrote to a king. Also, the Precious Garland, which is a much, much longer text. I think it's 500 verses in total. Um, that one is also written to a king, and there's a lot in one chapter in particular. It's divided into 5 chapters, and one of them goes into great detail about how to execute one's duties as a king. We don't have as many kings in our world today, but nonetheless, we all have responsibilities that are in tune with us being householders. So a lot of the advice that Nagarjuna is giving pertains to householders. Last week, we started the section that is unique to householders, though again, we can't say that everything that is mentioned in here are only practices for householders. But we find that we ourselves, as lay practitioners, are the ideal recipients of this advice of what sorts of things to engage in, not engage in, and what have you. So again, won't go over all of what we covered previously. The last topic that we touched on was practicing patience. There are so many things we come into contact with that can test our patience, can cause us to get upset and angry, especially in our modern life where we're exposed to so much more, right? In the days of the Buddha, people maybe didn't get annoyed by anything beyond their immediate neighborhood, right? Perhaps, there was a warring kingdom, a while away that might come and invade your kingdom or what have you, but essentially there wasn't this kind of inundation of concern for so many things that go beyond our own immediate environment. So we have to be careful with our minds that we don't get triggered by these things. Kind of interesting. I've been asked while I'm in California. I had a free Sunday now because they restructured the one retreat at Vajrapani. So I've been asked to do a class on dealing with how to work with challenging people. That's the way they put it. And I said, well, let's include situations too. I don't want to just talk about people, but we need to be attentive to that. A lot of things challenge us. A lot of things are potential triggers for us that can take us down that pathway. So remember, we talked about kind of the need for patience and the ability to perhaps remain somewhat undisturbed in the face of these triggers. That takes some training. I, again, have gone through those sorts of teachings many times here, as well as the workshop I did in January. No, in February, beginning of February at Thupten Norbuling. So know that there are a lot of teachings out there to help you with that. But we had that final little verse that had to do with kind of not, let me actually put that on the screen, not retaliating, making sure that we don't develop this mind of resentment that's just holding on to things with the aim of eventually getting back at the people who, what's going on? There we go. Okay. Now, verse 16, this person insulted me. This one struck or overwhelmed me. That one stole my wealth. Such resentment generates conflict. Those who abandon resentment sleep easily. Again, this is how we actually let go. I mentioned that analogy that's used. I don't know if it actually comes from a Buddhist sutra. I think it's actually a commentary later by maybe Buddhaghosa. But the idea is that when you have resentment, you're like holding on to a hot coal, waiting to throw it at the person who offended you. But you could be holding that coal for quite a while. Who's it hurting? Is it hurting the other person? No, because all of your anger and resentment that's boiling up in you is only hurting you. Doesn't even touch the other person. They may have long moved on and are, miles away. Who knows? You may never see them again. But because you're holding on to that resentment, you're torturing yourself. You're burning yourself. So again, this is something that as lay practitioners, not to say that ordained folks don't encounter things that are annoying and difficult for them, because I've heard from many ordained folks that it is challenging living in community with other ordained people. Imperfect people are everywhere, even in the cloth per se. But so we have to be again attentive, particularly in our lay lives, to those things that are triggering us. And here we are in a year where the political environment is certainly one of those things, right? Where you can get into some pretty heated stuff, and sometimes not even without seeing the person, you can just be typing online all kinds of replies and rebuttals of everything that other people are putting forward. So be careful. This is our big job in Buddhism, is to tend to our minds. If we're not tending to our minds, what are we doing? That's the main practice. We might think, oh, but I do a lot of mantra recitation and I do a lot of this and a lot of that. But this is the real work.
tending to our minds. Because that's the key. If we can reduce the negative tendencies, increase those that are positive, and we do even just a degree of that in this life, that will be great. But if we come out of this life with more anger and more resentment and more difficulty, and we don't even generate the minds of patience and loving kindness and compassion, well, then what's this life really for? What does spiritual progress really look like then? That's what it is supposed to be. We're supposed to be here to kind of work with our minds. So we're moving into then the sixth of, again, there are 9 topics in this section of advice primarily for householders. And then we get another ishul here. This wonderful word, ishul. Eschewing indecent conduct. This is going to talk about the 3 doors, which you all know very well, the door of the mind, the speech, and the body. And we're going to go in that order, actually, rather than body, speech, and mind like it's often presented. And the Nagarjuna is going to give us some advice about how, using different metaphors, what each of those 3 should be like in terms of our conduct, our action. So it says there, since the prime or ordinary person usually gives rise to the above virtuous and non-virtuous attitudes promiscuously, the following verse is stated with the aim of strengthening first, as I said, virtuous states of mind and weakening the non-virtuous ones. So this verse gives us 3 ways that we should have our thoughts be like. First, it says, understand thoughts as being like figures drawn in water. Of course, things drawn in water, they disappear right away, right? Because the water, the surface of the water will keep them from having any sort of solidity. Earth lasts a bit longer generally. I mean, but you have wind and water and other factors that can remove things from earth pretty easily. Stone is the most kind of permanent, if you want to use that word, of the 3 of them, right? If you carve something into stone, like when I was in Tibet traveling back in 1994, all of those wonderful passes where they would have rocks with Om Mani Padme Hum and various mantras carved into them. You know, those are going to last for a while, even though they're on these huge, very high, windy passes with wind coming constantly. The wind is going to take a long time to remove anything that's written on a rock. Whereas if it was written on the dirt, it would go right away, right? So we are looking at 3 different kind of states of firmness, if you will, or solidity. That one is very liquid and fluid, and all the way to something that is very, very solid, very stable. All right. So let's look at the advice that's given in the remaining 2 lines then. So understanding thoughts as being like those figures drawn in these 3 ways. For an afflicted state of mind, the first is best, right? To have it be like drawn in water. Like, okay, I saw that anger come, but it's gone now. I'm not going to hold on to it. You know, my jealousy's gone, whatever, any delusion. With an aspiration for the Dharma, the last, right? Because that's important that we make that as solid, as stable as stone, so that we have that in our minds throughout this life, as well as going forward into future lives. So it says there in the commentary from Venerable Randawa, a person's mental activity can be of varying degrees of firmness, to be understood in 3 basic types. First, like a figure drawn upon water. Second, like a figure drawn in the dirt. And third, like a figure etched in stone. In the case of an afflicted mind, it is best for one's thoughts to be unfirm, that is, like a figure drawn upon water. But with virtuous states of mind, such as aspiration for the Dharma, it is best for them to be firm, like a figure etched in stone. Therefore, one should exert oneself in accordance with these examples. So again, this is I don't know, they don't give you an idea of what the ones like dirt are. I mean, maybe those are kind of our other minds that are maybe not necessarily as stable. We don't want them to be kind of as firm, but the idea of having our Dharma states of mind, our virtuous states of mind, becoming very firm, that of course is through practice, as I was saying just a short while ago. You know, the purpose of being here is to acquaint our minds with virtuous states. The virtuous states of mind are set out really very clearly in the teachings on the mental factors. Many of you have studied the minds and mental factors, Lorik. There are 11 virtuous states of mind. There are the opposite, the main ones are the opposite of the three poisons: non-attachment, non-anger or non-hatred, and non-ignorance. We want to kind of be a complete antidote and opposing mind to those three poisons.
What was the last one?
Non-ignorance. Yeah. So we have, again, the three poisons are attachment, anger or hatred, and ignorance. So we want to have the opposite of those, and not just when we say non-ignorance, it doesn't mean simply the absence of ignorance. It means the full blossoming of wisdom. That is the antidote to ignorance, completely removing all of our ignorance. By non-attachment, we don't mean just the absence of attachment, but the mind that is able to abide in a place of not being drawn into all of the various enticements, pleasures, what have you, in a way that would be detrimental. That we can actually be with everything in the world without the complication of attachment. We can replace it even with, factors of concern, genuine care and concern for others, not being attached to them. And then the third one, of anger or non-hatred, that's the foundation of our loving kindness, right? Again, we're not just talking about a simple absence of those things, because I would hope all of you listening to me right now have no hatred in your mind. If you're generating hatred towards me, then maybe we should talk. But but the idea is that is good that you're not having hatred in your mind, but that's not non-hatred. Non-hatred is the development of the mind that is the antidote to hatred, the mind that is lovingly caring for others, wanting to be concerned about their welfare and what have you, rather than the mind of hatred that would rather, vote that person off the island, get them out of here. Just, so again, these are what we're talking about in terms of the main root virtues, is the opposites of those three. And then, of course, there are many other virtues: faith, self-respect, consideration for others. Many of these that are aids on our path that really help us to develop our minds. So again, this is our goal, is to practice these virtues as firmly as we can in this life. Etch them in stone, because that's what you carry forward when you get to the end of this life. Of course, you carry forward all the negative stuff too. I mean, that doesn't get left behind. But it's important that we have that to rely upon, because that's what's going to get us into our next rebirth and beyond that to, liberation and enlightenment. If you don't start creating that kind of virtue now, while you have the opportunity to do so, well, then where is it going to come from? You might have the greatest faith in the three jewels, but if we don't do anything with that, and three jewels are not going to save us, they're not our saviors in that way. They give us the Dharma, and it's up to us to practice the Dharma. Okay, so again, the afflicted mind should be like written in water. This takes a bit of practice too, right? Because we don't always have the ability to even see when the delusions are arising, to see when our minds are getting disturbed. That takes great mindfulness and attentiveness. We already talked about mindfulness previously, having a sort of conscientiousness around our behavior and our minds. I mean, it's one thing to shut the two doors of the body and speech. We're going to get to those shortly. That is where we start our practice. But to, work on the door of the mind, it's a bit harder work, right? You have to actually spend a bit more time in meditation, becoming familiar with our minds, and then applying that during the day, so that when we see that there's this movement in that direction, we are there. I think I shared that verse from Geshe Ben Kongyo, who said, "Standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes, other than this, I have no other job." Right? That's our job, is to have the antidote to immediately apply whenever we see an affliction arising in our minds. That's hard because afflictions are going on quite a bit of time, right? Especially attachment. We talked about anger previously when we were working with patients, but attachment is they say it's like the oil that gets into cloth. It kind of becomes a part of the cloth, right? It's very hard to extract. It's hard for us to even see attachment in our minds because it's so prevalent. We just really get attached to it whenever there's something pleasant coming in that, oh, good, oh, good, oh, good. I get all these wonderful things. It's okay to have those pleasant things. That isn't the problem. The problem is the mind of attachment that grasps at them, that doesn't want to be separated from them. It wants to keep that going. If we can keep the energy of that going throughout our whole life, this is what most people do in this world, right? We don't want to be kind of like that in terms of just grasping at these transitory pleasures. We're going to see some more advice coming up about that as well. Nagarjuna has a section where he has a verse pertaining to what are called the 8 worldly dharmas. The 8 worldly dharmas is how we waste this life, by being attached to all of these pleasures. So again, the attachment is the problem. The pleasures themselves can come and go. If it's like, oh, it's fine. If this happens and it's good, that's okay. I'm not going to get attached to it. And this happens, it's bad. I'm not going to get attached to that either or averse to that. I'm just going to go with the flow and these things happen and not let my mind get bent out of shape. Because that's what happens, right? We get totally fixated on needing to have everything be pleasant and wonderful and delightful and absolutely hating it when something changes that. This is how we screw ourselves up, essentially, by reinforcing these 2 habitual patterns of an attachment to getting what we want, and even an attachment, we could call it, to not getting what we don't want. We really don't want those things to surface. And we want to make sure that if they enter in our lives, we're immediately getting them out. This is how, again, most people live their lives. It's really quite sad when we see it operating in our world, but then look in the mirror. Are we that different? Are we really doing things differently? If we aren't, then we need to really go back and examine what is our real practice of Dharma. Because these afflictions, when they arise, they should be like written in water and they're immediately gone. Like, oh, okay. I see, there's my tendency to get angry at this, but I'm not gonna go with it. There's nowhere, it doesn't lead anywhere profitable. Again, by anger here, I am wanting to just make sure I differentiate. I think I mentioned this last time. We're not talking about the sense of wanting things to be corrected out of compassion for other beings. Like we call that anger sometimes, right? Somebody has anger because of situations in our world, these social justice issues and what have you. There's nothing wrong with being concerned about those things with a motivation of compassion for both the perpetrators and the victims, as they are labeled in that particular scenario. Having a compassion that wants that to be rectified because we see it's bringing suffering to both parties. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not anger in the diluted sense, but the anger that is really just about me wanting things my way, and getting upset when they're not that way. That's the anger that we're focusing on here. All right, so let's go on to speech, the second door of these 3 that is presented in this section. And the little introductory bit says there, just as one thoughts are of 3 types, so also is one's speech. The following verse is stated to illustrate how one should conduct oneself verbally. The Jinna again is a term, epithet for the Buddha, the conqueror, the Jinna, declared a person's speech as being of 3 types, pleasing, truthful, and improper, like honey, a flower, and filth. The last should be abandoned. So in this case, there are 2 types of speech that are actually very useful and beneficial. The ones that are pleasing, like honey, and truthful, like a flower. We're going to see how those are spelled out in terms of it. The last one, something being kind of improper, or another word for this is kind of, speech that is really disrespectful, speech that is harsh and nasty, those sorts of ways of speaking, those are like filth, and those are what should be abandoned. Now, again, we might have times where we use more kind of harsh words, if you will, in particular situations because that's what's required, but we're doing it out of compassion. We often talk about that as being this sort of wrathful aspect that we want to be able to apply. But even parents do this with children, right? If you have your child and it's just learning what things are and starting to walk, and you have like a candle or something, an open flame, and the child's getting ready to reach over and touch it, you wouldn't go, oh, now, dear, don't go over there, like saying it all pleasing and soft and sweet. You might yell at the child, right? You might say, get away from there. What are you doing, right? And you're not doing it because you hate the child or are angry at the child. You're doing it because you want the child to not suffer, to not burn their hand in the fire, right? So I'm not saying that all of our speech has to be pleasing in tone. And we know this from many of our teachers, right? I can think of one in particular who has a way of kind of helping people to wake up through very cutting speech, right? Very useful. She's very skilled in doing it. Venerable Rabina is just quite amazing in her way of cutting through a lot of the nonsense for people. If I tried to do that, people would go, God, what's wrong with Don tonight? They'd probably think, I'm off my rocker or something. But, she has an ability to do that, an ability to cut through some nonsense. And it's hard still for many people to hear that type of speech, but her motivation is good. She's saying it out of that kind of wrathful dimension. So let's go to the commentary and take a look at what is said here in regard to these three analogies for what our speech should be like. So the Jinnah, again, the victor or conqueror, the one who has conquered all evil, declared a person's speech to be of three types. What are these three? They are first, speech which is pleasing and agreeable. Secondly, speech which is true, the truth. And third, improper speech. The first of these is like honey because it causes delight, right? We like to hear pleasing words. Most people do. And in fact, that is when we come to the section of the Lam Rim at the very end where they talk about the ways of what they call it gathering disciples, but it's not proselytizing. It's just the fact that we are concerned about the welfare of others. So we want to be able to bring them into the fold in a sense, at least have them have some influence from us, so that they can experience the Dharma and be, more content and happy themselves. So we're not doing it out of like an ego thing, like I want to develop a whole army of people that are following me and I can be the biggest person in the world or whatever. We're doing it because we genuinely care about others. So one of the first things that they say in those four means of guiding or gathering disciples is to speak pleasantly. Because people do like to hear things. They like to be complimented on who they are, and people talk to them with a genuine interest and a very soft approach. In general, this is true. Again, I'm not saying that everything we say has to be in that vein, but this is one way of bringing people kind of closer to us. It's like honey, it's sweet. It's something that people enjoy, right? I don't know if there's anybody who doesn't enjoy honey. There must be people who don't, but nonetheless, it's the analogy that is probably pretty easy for us to see. While the second, which is the true speech, is like a flower in its beauty and its praiseworthiness. There's beauty in truth because truth keeps everyone grounded in the same reality, right? When we are lying to people, being deceitful to people, when we have societies being pervaded by lack of truthfulness, then we see how disturbing it can be because there's no awareness of what is actually going on. So truth is beautiful. It creates more harmony. It's praiseworthy. The third, which is the improper speech, which again can be this sort of disrespectful, cheating, harsh words. This, due to its baseness, is like filth. Again, not all of things that might appear like that would necessarily be that base, because we might see somebody, doing a teaching or something where they are being quite direct with somebody in a wrathful form of talking. But this is where the speech is really just improper as well. So we abandon, therefore, the last type and we practice the first two. All right, I think that one's pretty straightforward. Let's go on to the third, which is the body, the door of the body. The conduct of sentient beings who abide in samsara is of four types. The following verse is stated to illustrate that one should maintain the highest of them. Persons are of four types. So those who through their, primarily they're talking about their physical actions, but this would include their other karma as well. Those who go from light and reach an end of light, from darkness to an end of darkness, from light to darkness, and darkness to light. Be like the first of them. Well, this is being said to us because we are actually in what we would call a state of light, kind of being born in this ideal human rebirth. We have something that is really quite I don't know how to apply the analogy of light, but it's something that has great value, right? We are in a place of light. We're not in a place where we have the darkness of the delusions that exist in the lower realms and so on. So we have the light of wisdom, if you will, or intellect that we possess as a human being. We're not trying to put other people down or animals down or what have you by saying this. We're just acknowledging that these are different states of existence. And as much as we love our animal friends and want to care for them, and Zia here in the Gompa, she's already asleep. I can be talking all kinds of words that would be wonderful for Zia to hear and apply in her life, in this life and future lives. Maybe there's some imprint for future lives, but she doesn't have the ability to use her limited intellect to understand these words right now, to practice according to these words right now. But we have that. So we are in a place of light. And the ideal thing is through our actions and through the body that we possess in this human birth, to use this to attain another state of light. In other words, another ideal rebirth like this one, rather than going from this place of light to a place of darkness, which unfortunately they say is where most of the human beings who are born in this world will go, because they don't have the knowledge and the ability then to use this life to go to another place of light. Again, I'm not decrying or putting down any of there's wonderful practitioners of many other traditions who are probably going to some place of light on the basis of their good behavior. But we have a lot of people in this world who aren't following any sort of real pathway to create virtue. A lot of non-virtue in our world. So again, that we don't want to go from light to dark. And then there are beings who are born in the dark, who unfortunately often end up in the dark because there's not much they can do in a life that is plagued by ignorance, anger, desire, what have you. So they often only create the karma to end up in an unfortunate state. And then there's the rare few who are born into a place of darkness, but actually are able to go from there to a place of light. Of course, we all had that happen to us, at least. They say, of course, we've had no limit to our rebirths. So this has happened to us many times, but it's not the majority of our rebirths. It's actually very hard to get out of a place of darkness into a place of light. Because again, the obscuration is so heavy. But we all have seeds of virtue. We all have those in our continuum. And there are those rare beings that will go from a place of darkness, of unfortunate rebirth, into an ideal state. But again, what do they do with that? It's always hard to say, right? Ideally, we should use it to attain another state of light, at least, if not, again, attain the more lasting results of liberation and enlightenment. So the commentary from Venerable Rendawa says, it is stated in a sutra that there are 4 types of persons, being those who go from light to light and so forth. This is explained in the following manner. Persons who have taken birth among deities or humans of great fortune and then are reborn again in the very same circumstances are the kind who go from light and reach an end of light. Those who have taken birth in the lower states of existence, again, that would be the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, the pretas, and the animals, or as humans of little fortune, they are including in there the human existences that are not so fortunate, where people don't have as ideal physical situations as what we currently possess in our perfect human rebirth. And then are reborn in the same circumstances are the kind who go from darkness and reach an end of darkness. Maybe not same, but certainly similar circumstances. Those who go from a lower rebirth to another lower rebirth, or even if they get a rebirth as a human, one of little fortune, and then ending up in a lower state. Okay. Then finally, or actually these are the next 2. People who have taken birth among deities or humans of great fortune and are then reborn in one of the 3 lower states, or as humans of little fortune, are the kind who go from light and reach an end of darkness. They end up in a state that is not as ideal. Again, we can see that this is true for many people in this world who, even if they have a human existence with relatively good fortune, they have resources, they have working faculties, they have an ability to use their intellect, but they use it solely for the pleasures of this life. and getting a good job, Silicon Valley, and doing whatever on the basis of their skills and abilities. They can buy all kinds of homes all over the world and really live the good life until they die. And then where do they go from there? They've used this whole life just for the pleasures of this existence. Then finally, the last one, those who have been born in one of the three lower states or as humans of little fortune, and then are born among deities or humans of great fortune, are the kind who go from darkness and reach an end of light. Again, that does happen. It's more difficult to achieve, but the karma will ripen eventually. Of these, one should be like the first type who go from light to light. Again, that's kind of making the assumption we're all in that place of light, that from what I can tell, we are of great fortune. All of us who are here gathered tonight, online as well as in the Gompa here, have incredible good fortune. And so we want to make sure that we use that good fortune to at least go to another equally good state, which, as I talked about earlier, towards the beginning of this course, they say is ideally the human realm, because again, in the human existence is where we have the greatest potential to develop our minds. You can go to a God realm, without a doubt. These God and demigod realms are places where there's a lot less kind of coarse or gross suffering. But the situation is not as ideal. You often have a harder time generating renunciation there because things are much better, that you don't really kind of generate an awareness of the suffering nature of samsara. And of course, the teachings are not there as prominently as they are in the human world. But even in the human world, we see that these teachings are not as widely disseminated as what teachings of other traditions, for example, might be. So again, we can see the amazing good fortune that we've created in this life, that we want to make sure that we continue in future lives, creating all the causes for that to happen. And we can do that. Again, that's the first result that the Buddha said, that there's temporal happiness that we all can have of a fortunate rebirth, a good rebirth. So Stella's asking, does it all have to do with karma? And absolutely. I mean, when we look at, again, we went through the 10 non-virtues as part of that verse that pertained to practicing the 10 virtues. And whenever you have an action that is complete, whether it be virtuous or non-virtuous, remember we looked at the 4 factors that make it complete, and even Venerable Rendawa went into this. When we have the proper an object of that action, the proper mental state, which includes recognizing the object correctly, having the motivation to do that action, and then having, in the case of non-virtue, a delusion present. In the case of virtue, the absence of a delusion, hopefully a more virtuous state of mind. Then thirdly, the deed itself, and then it has to come to a conclusion. There has to be a culmination of that deed. When all 4 of those branches are present, then we have created a seed that will give rise to a future rebirth. If it's virtuous, it will give rise to one of the 3 fortunate realms of gods, demigods, and humans. And if it is non-virtuous, it will give rise to rebirth in one of those lower realms. Again, the hell beings, hungry ghosts, and animals. So absolutely, this is karmically determined. And again, this one isn't as clear in terms of it being referring to the body, but this is how we make some of the most powerful karma, is through our bodies. Everything starts with the mind. Our bodies don't do things without our mind being involved as the motivating factor behind it. But you create the heaviest karma of the 3, body, speech, and mind. The heaviest are created through your body. So abandoning killing. I remember hearing this. I don't know who told me this, and I don't know if it's absolutely true then, but I liked the way that it was phrased. Apparently, this person said Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, was talking once before a group of like FPMT staff, center directors, what have you, SPCs, who knows. And he was saying to them, if all of the FPMT existed for however long it exists, all the centers of Dharma, everything that we have, and one person stops killing, it would be worth it. This is kind of the gist of what he said. Like having all of this energy and all of this that, Mummy Max and all these dear people put together, that is the FPMT. If it existed and all that came out of it was one person stopping killing, that would be worth it. That would be enough. Not to say that that's what we should aim for, is just to get one person to stop killing. But I mean, if you imagine that if everybody who came to Buddhist teachings decided to alter even that one behavior and say, okay, I get it. I'm going to stop killing all the little critters that invade my house and and the mosquitoes that land on my arms in the summer and whatever. But, somebody who makes a determination, that's huge because that's the most powerful negative karma we can create. So it creates the most powerful virtue when we abandon it, right? By abandoning killing, you're creating very powerful virtuous karma. Again, it will be tempered by other things, but I'm saying in general, because it's such a heavy action negatively, it becomes a very heavy action positively when we abandon killing. So this makes some sense, right, to correlate even this last one with the body, because this is how we're creating a lot of the negative karma for lower rebirth. Though obviously we still also need to attend to our speech, the 4 actions of speech. We need to attend to the 3 of mind, all of these that I went through when I went through that section on the 10 non-virtues. So again, this is how we actually go from light to dark or light to light or whatever, is by making sure that we engage in the causes for creating that. And if you don't create the causes to be reborn in the lower realms, you won't be reborn in the lower realms. I mean, you may have the karma from another lifetime that could somehow ripen, but that's for us to purify in this life as well. We talked about purification being an important part of our daily practice. I mentioned it many times here. So, okay. So yes, absolutely. Everything comes down to what we do in this life, which is through all 3 doors of our body, speech, and mind, but particularly to pay a lot of attention to our physical actions. How do we be less harmful in the world with our bodies? So, okay, any other questions before we go on? We'll move on to the next section. This next one is kind of interesting. It's called Finding Proper Associates. This is the 7th of the 9th topics in this section. Finding proper associates becomes important because we are influenced by other people, by the people that we hang out with. So let's look at the introduction to this, and maybe I'll read the verse, but I do want to talk a little bit about this before we read the other commentary. Next is learning the proper qualities that one's associates should possess. A householder must associate with many persons, and the following verse is stated in order to illustrate the appropriate manner of doing so. So here we have everyone being compared to a mango. It's kind of interesting. What kind of mango are you? So people should be understood as being like the mango fruit. There are unripe ones which seem ripe, ripe ones which seem unripe, unripe which appear unripe, and ripe appearing ripe. Any guesses as to which is the most favorable? The ripe appearing ripe ones, right? Yeah, I mean, if it kind of coincides, if they look ripe from the outside and are ripe on the inside, then you got a good mango, right? It's got that nice red hue on the outside and it's nice juicy flesh on the inside, right? So
A lot of times you don't know.
this is true.
Actually, got into it.
Yes, exactly. But so again, I want to talk about the importance of choosing good friends and good associates. Remember when some of you, I'm sure, have studied this with me or with other teachers. They say that Lama Tsongkhapa says that I think this comes from actually a teaching of a Sangha, but in his Lamrim Chenmo, he points out 6 factors that give rise to the delusions. And of course, the first 3, when I present them, are the main ones. Of course, there has to be an object, such as, let's use mangoes, why not? Such as a delicious mango that appears in the market, that they start smelling and you go, where's that mango smell coming from? That one. That object, of course, plays a role. We have to, secondly, have the seeds of the delusions in our minds. And the seeds of delusions are the seeds of having had that delusion before, right? Every time we've had attachment for food, mangoes, whatever, we planted a seed for attachment. Until you do the deeper work, you're going to have those seeds in your mental continuum kind of waiting to bring forth the delusion of attachment. We have them for anger, we have them for jealousy, we have them for all of the afflictions. So you have to have that kind of propensity there. So those who have removed those seeds through the path that leads to liberation, even if they're in contact with the object. It doesn't cause attachment to arise because there's no seed of attachment. The third one is you have to have an inappropriate mental attention. You have to kind of look at the thing and start thinking about it in ways that are erroneous. And of course, attachment is the mind that exaggerates all the positive qualities. It thinks that this is the absolute best mango of all of the mangoes that are there. And I have to get this for myself because this is the one that is really going to be, the mango that makes my day, whatever. So we like overlay a pleasantness and an unbelievable kind of nature to it that isn't even there. I mean, some people can't stand mangoes. And some people would go, "Oh, what's that hideous smell?" Or whatever. Right? I mean, because it happens with everything, regardless of I think it would be impossible to find one universal object that everyone sees the same way. Well, we have our own inappropriate way of relating to various objects for those that are pleasing to us. We overlay all these good qualities, and this is our inappropriate mental attention that leads to attachment. So those are the first three that happen. The other three are variable to some degree. The next one is habit. Well, you might have a habit of buying mangoes, right? Of looking for those most delicious mangoes. And so you're constantly on the lookout for good mangoes, always wanting to find the best ones and getting so upset when you go to the store and you can't find one that is good at all. So that increases your delusion of attachment for mangoes, right? Your habit of continually being obsessed with mangoes, right? The fifth and the sixth ones are actually external factors that play a role. And the fifth is being guided or misguided by bad companions, by misleading companions. We have to be careful because people get us into trouble. I hate to say it, if we're not watching our own behavior in our minds, we can very easily just start going with the crowd. And maybe it was much easier to do that when we were younger, in high school and whenever, and kids would say, "Yeah, you want to get together Friday night? We're going to go and do this and do that and all this bad behavior you want to engage in," and be like, "Oh yeah, let's go, let's go." But if those friends weren't telling you to do that, you probably wouldn't do it. You probably wouldn't make it up on your own, say, "I'm going to go do this." But because they're like, "Oh yeah, this is great, we're going to go do this," and da da da. So we have to be careful because people do have an influence on us. That's the emphasis that we're placing here, that Nagarjuna is giving us a verse or two. I think it's just one in this case, that we are going to get advice about choosing the proper people to be with, because they do have an influence on us. The last one is they often say it's just like the other factors in our world that give us bad teachings in a sense. They sometimes call it wrong tenets, but that just sounds kind of highfalutin. This is like all the stuff that influences you from the outside that makes you think in particular ways. I was talking about the political situation in this country. We're fed into believing particular points of view that go with a particular political outlook or whatever. And we think that those are the way that we need to then behave and look at things in our world, right? Those influence us to some degree, sometimes in virtuous ways, sometimes in non-virtuous ways. You have to be very attentive to that, because you can start practicing and living your life according to what are really false teachings, really telling you to behave in a particular way that is not in accord with how you want to behave ideally. I mean, look at the way that our world, to some degree, though not everybody in it obviously, accepts the taking of another life when that person has threatened your own life or whatever. Look at war and all the ways that that is manifesting, where people feel completely justified, and other countries even come to the aid of that person who's been, that country who's been influenced or had to experience the harm from someone else, and they come to their aid to get back at that person, right, or that group of people or that country. Right. So this is something that in our world, nobody has any problem with accepting that we're going to go to war to help this country because of what's happening from another country. But is that good dharma? It's not good dharma. It's just creating the causes for more violence in our world, and of course the effects of that karmically. So again, we have to be careful what we take in terms of teachings, if you will. They're not going to be formal teachings, like sitting in a gompa like this and somebody giving you these things that you're supposed to, pay attention to and follow. They're things that seep into our awareness culturally, even through like the entertainment that we watch. I was telling somebody the other day how shocked I am when I read descriptions of movies, like some of these movies that have been nominated for this and that, and how many films are about revenge. And you like and everybody cheers at the end when that person finally gets revenge on the person who did something to them or their family or whatever. I mean, this is a really sad statement of our culture. So those things, they influence us. If we, and then when we see people that we know, it's not a fictional film or something, people that we know, and we hear that they got back at somebody that harmed them, then we rejoice. We feel good about that. That's not good, right? Because again, that's embracing violence, harm. The Buddha's teachings are based on non-harmfulness. And so, yeah, still.
Okay, so I always thought that it was virtuous to defend somebody who's being abused
Mhm.
or, in a violence, like somebody's trying to hurt them or abuse them.
So I guess again, Stella's question is, and she said, I thought it was virtuous for us to defend someone who is being harmed or is being abused or whatever. We have to look at defend. What do you mean by defend? Because,
I'm thinking specifically about the Ukrainians who were sitting there not doing anything and
right.
they got attacked.
But again, what does contributing to the violence against the Russians on the basis of the Russians having attacked the Ukrainians, the karma of that is just to create more violence. And if we look at it karmically, again, this is something where we have to kind of pull back and see the bigger picture, right? There's a karma involved, and again, I'm not saying that I am totally okay with this. I'm just saying this is just an explanation of what's going on. That the Ukrainian people created a karma that caused them to be invaded by the Russian people because they could not have been invaded by the Russian people unless that karma was there. Right? I mean, do we agree at that level that there has to be a karmic cause for this to happen? For what happened on October 7th in Israel, when Hamas came in and did all these horrific things. It sounds, I'm not meaning it to be cold and uncompassionate. It's the exact opposite. I have great compassion for the beings who create the government to experience these sufferings. But when those sorts of things happen in our world, they are a karmic ripening for the beings that are experiencing it. How does me contributing to getting back at the people who did that, how does that help resolve the suffering? Because it's only going to create more negative karma. It's only going to cause the Israelis, as they are doing, to bombard the people that they are trying to kill, and in the process do all sorts of other collateral damage and what have you. It's only perpetuating a cycle of karmic back and forth. It doesn't break the cycle. Now, again, when we say defend in a much more kind of what's compassionate way, where I mean, I can still have compassion there too, but what does it mean to defend? It means to help things get resolved, to help if someone is being abused. Let's use the example there of someone in an abusive relationship, and we know of it, and we want to assure that they stop that cycle of abuse happening. The person who is abusing is creating negative karma. The person who's being abused is suffering from that. Well, then we find a way that is defending that person that isn't causing harm in the ways that we're talking about, like killing the person who's abusing them and what have you. I mean, you find a way to resolve things without those sorts of extreme actions, right? So there's nothing wrong with coming to the defense in a sense if it's couched in those sorts of terms. But what does it mean to defend a country by sending more and more aid and military weapons and just perpetuating more violence? I don't think it's karmically sound. And I would think most people would agree when looking at this, right?
I don't know, I really don't know. I mean, I can see that you're looking at it from a karmic aspect. But, when somebody sees children being
Right.
bombed and hurt, like
Mhm.
You know, like the Palestinians, people don't even have a place to live, for
Right.
example.
Right. I know it's very hard and there's, Stella's just talking to how hard it is when we see suffering happening that seems to be so unjust and that we want to rectify. We just have to get at what is the right way to rectify it. There's nothing wrong with the urge to have it rectified. And that's what makes good bodhisattvas in this world, is wanting to do something about the problems they see in the world and the suffering that's going on in our world. Bodhisattvas don't run up in the cave when all this happens and disappear and say, well, I hope it all works out for you. We want to be active in the world as much as possible. But we have to watch how we do that. If what we do increases our own delusion and moreover creates karma that only causes others to suffer more because of those actions, well, then how is that beneficial? We have to look at the long term and the karmic kind of perspective that even if through not defending Ukraine, Russia were to conquer Ukraine and cause a lot of suffering for the people of Ukraine and maybe even go on to do other things, even if that were the consequence, it would be better not to engage in that type of behavior because it's only going to feed into the karma of that being unresolved. I don't know. Macabre, were you going to share something?
So, with the example of Ukraine and also Tibet, like,
Mhm.
can you, like, from what your knowledge of history and whatever, so how did the Ukrainians create that karma for themselves? And how did the Tibetans create that karma for themselves?
Yeah, that's a very hard one. Macaw's asking about, well, then what would be the insight, if I have any, in terms of what creates the sort of karma for a nation like Ukraine to experience what it's going through, or Tibet, to have had the Chinese occupation and everything that occurred from that, the suffering that continues in occupied Tibet to this day. Well, it's hard to say. I mean, again, I can always fall back on that. What is taught that the intricacies of karma is something that mere mortals like myself cannot really know. I mean, I cannot really fathom that the way in which karma acts to create those sorts of things. But I trust that the Buddha, as a reliable guide, because I have come to see him as a reliable guide, isn't speaking falsity when he puts forward that karma is always behind these things. It's obviously a karma that is created when perhaps in another realm, in another situation, the people of Tibet may have invaded the people of China, not in those countries, but in another situation where you have the exact karma playing out in a reverse order. So the people who were the country that was attacked and the attackers, they're now going to play the opposite roles. And the country that was attacking is now going, or that was attacked is now going to be the attacker. The one that was attacked is now, or that was the attacker is now the attacked. Sorry, it's to be hard to say all those clearly. So this is what happens, is like things keep flip-flopping because every karma that you create in a particular way that is towards these beings comes back around as an experience for you. You're shaking your head no.
Yeah, no. Like, we don't get taught a lot of
Mhm.
history of those countries. We don't get taught a lot of Asian history.
Mhm.
But like, in order to support your hypothesis, I would just ask you to like give some examples.
But again, I'm not saying that those necessarily happened in this world, because Macaw's pointing out, well, but do we know the history of China and Tibet, and was it actually like this flip-flopping in that guise? I'm not saying that that's what created the karma. I'm saying that in another situation and perhaps another entirely different world, the group of people that were the Tibetans at the time of the Chinese occupation were the conquerors over the Chinese who are now occupying them. That this is the type of energy that's created. And it's again, until you break out of that, until you say, okay, I'm not gonna try to fight back at the conquerors who are coming in and cause harm on them in the same way that they're causing harm on me. Until you break that cycle, you're going to keep creating the karma to be harmed and to harm again. And it's just going to go like a ping pong ball back and forth. And I'm not saying, again, that it's just within this world. I'm saying that it's karma that could have been created eons ago in another world.
Well, how is our planet end up with all this nonsense?
how does our planet end up
Yeah,
with?
I would say
Yeah.
our planet's pretty innocent and pretty wonderful. And
But our
Um,
planet, I mean, that gets to be giving a personification to the planet that I don't think is fair, because a planet is not a sentient being. A planet is a planet,
yes,
no, it's not a sentient being according to Buddha. You're bringing up things that are outside of what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha doesn't teach the planet as a human being. They're a sentient being. There are sentient beings in 6 realms. The realms where sentient beings abide, this world that we are abiding in, is a karmic creation. It's our karma to create a world like this. The world doesn't have its own mind or its own sentience. No, this is not something the Buddha would hold. That doesn't mean that it's living, of course. There are many living things in this world. There are a lot of inanimate things in this world as well. So again, this creation of this world, which is, again, the Buddha would say one of many, many, many worlds, is a product of the karma of the beings who inhabit this world. And what is happening to this world is not just identified as, like when we talk about climate change and so on. Yes, we can say there are certain causes that we can identify through science that are causing this, but why are we experiencing this? Because we've created the karma to have this experience. And how do we change that? By changing our karma. And do pay attention to what's going on scientifically. Sure, I mean, all the things that they are saying we should do in order to stop all of this. But the reality is that we have created the karma for this. Our world is changing on the basis of our karma. It's not changing on its own independently. It's changing because we created the causes for it to change. Not just through the behaviors of, fossil fuels and all this other, but through the delusions of greed and everything that have existed since beginningless time, that have created the karma to have a world that then begins to fall apart and to have, difficulty sustaining the life on it. Yeah.
So, I
So-
get that, I get what you're saying.
Mhm.
I keep going back in my mind to thinking about that story about the Buddha and the sea captain.
Right,
who-
which.
Okay. So you can-
But and invariably this comes up the one time in a sutra. I don't think there's another one in the entire corpus of what the Buddha taught, where he says, when I was a bodhisattva ship captain and through my clairvoyance, I saw that there was one merchant who was going to take the lives of all the other merchants and steal all the merchandise. And, that in that one instance, the Buddha was able to use violence against this man with the mind of compassion. Not with the mind of
not-
anger
not because of the people he was gonna hurt, but.
it was primarily because of the merchant was going to create unbelievable karma from killing all the other merchants on board the ship. So he had amazing compassion for the being who was going to do this, as well as, of course, including the other merchants that were going to be killed. And it's the only instance. And so I always have a hard time with it, because I think people make that sound like, well, then I have an excuse for when I can practice violence. But can we have the purity of mind that bodhisattva sea captain had, ship captain, to be able to know that our actions are purely driven by compassion, and that therefore we can take out Putin or whoever and have it be an act of compassion that will, have unbelievable good effects in the world and what have you? I think you have to have a pretty amazing practice to do that. We don't even see great beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama doing that, right? He's not plotting to remove Putin from power I think it's pretty rare, the situations where you have that awareness, that insight. So I don't want it to become like a possibility for us mere mortals again to kind of think that we can do that. I think that takes an incredible amount of insight and compassion to be able to know that your action is moving in that direction. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that, to go back to this, in that case, he actually had a mind of virtue, even though the action appeared non-virtuous, because of the purity of intention behind that. But I think that's way beyond most of our reach at this point. So we need to kind of get it back into what we were talking about here. So when we're talking about the people that we associate with, we're talking about beings that can influence us in various ways. And I was giving that list of these 6 factors. And then we got stuck on that last one about all the various things that can influence us, all the things that we hear in our world that cause us to adopt morality that is not really in accord with what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha doesn't generally teach that you should inflict violence on another being, period. I mean, that is the bottom line, ahimsa, non-harmfulness. That's the really guiding principle behind all of Buddhist morality. It's the very, very rare situation where we would actually be able to do that and make it into a virtuous act. So the point I was making was, again, that fifth factor, which is not being misled by other people. It can be so easy for us to get caught up in kind of other people telling us stuff that causes us to go into, again, kind of the wrong direction, not to do what we need to do with this life. So we have to find proper associates. So let's look at the advice that's given here. Be an opportunity for further discussion of this, perhaps when we get to the end of class, which is not too far away, but nonetheless, let's go through this bit of commentary. So it says there, people, like the mango fruit, are of 4 types. So once one has learned what the different qualities are, one should follow the proper course of action. Some mangoes are unripe on the inside, but seem ripe from the outside. Right? Nice red color, and yet when you cut into it, you can't even cut because it's just hard as a rock in there. It's not ripe at all. While others, telling me my battery's running low. I was worried that this might happen. Maybe we can unplug something over there, John, and let me get my cord. Hold on one second. Computer's happy now, I think. Okay, then we have the second. Others are ripe on the inside, but seem unripe from the outside. Third are those which are inwardly unripe and appear unripe from the outside too. And then finally, there are those which are ripe on the inside and also appear ripe from the outside. Persons are of 4 similar types, okay? The very first one, which is like the unripe mango that appears ripe, are vulgar in thoughts, but their actions are good. So it might appear like they're doing, okay, and they might seem like decent people, but underneath the surface, there's something that is not quite right. I mean, this is where sometimes people do things with ulterior motives, right? You might have people who seem like really generous and kind, and they're doing all these things, but they're plotting the whole time how to get you and pull you into something, right? So we have to be careful. Things might appear ripe on the outside, but they're really not ripe on the inside. The second type are the opposite of this, right? Where we have people who are vulgar in their actions, but inside they've got a good mind, a good intention. They just aren't as attentive and meticulous in doing what they need to do in their actions. I mean, that sounds kind of contradictory, but these things happen, right? People may think well, but they just don't always act that way, right? The third type, both can act in a base manner, right? We can get those. The surface matches the inside, right? In that case, what is there? What is that one phrase? I think it was.
What you see is what you get.
There's that one. What you see is what you get. But there was the other one of is it Maya Angelou who said, when someone shows who they are the first time, believe them or something. It's like when they've shown you initially who they are, well, then believe them. You don't have to wait to see if there's maybe someone else there. That's that type of person, right? They've already kind of shown you what they are the first time. So you don't have to guess what's really under the surface. It's kind of right in line with that. Of course, the fourth one is also like that too, to some degree. This is somebody who's excellent in both attitude and action. They've shown themselves to be upstanding in regard to how they behave towards you and the actions they do, and that's who they are on the inside. So you want that kind of consistency. You want that person to have the good exterior as well as the good interior, having good qualities inside, and those come out in terms of the way they are with people, the things that they say, what have you. So
This reminds me of that saying though that I read in a book when I was teaching.
uh-huh.
Men and melons are hard to know.
I don't know if you heard that Stella said that when she was teaching, when she was a teacher, that she came across this phrase that men and melons are hard to know. You know, like people and melons in particular, because we get that in the summer all the time. Last year's watermelons, we really like watermelons. Like I had a hard time getting a good watermelon. It looked good on the outside. I do the little knocking, I do all these little tests. And I take it home and I cut into it and it was awful. You know, so melons are hard to know, people are hard to know. Because sometimes, again, you do have these deceptions going on. They might appear really good on the outside, but they're not so good on the inside. Or, you know, they might even appear vulgar, but they might have some good qualities, right? Again, the one thing I don't think this verse is telling us to do is to be judgmental. That's not what this verse is about. This verse is because we want to have compassion for all beings and never shut any of them out of our hearts, right? It's just you have to still be very meticulous in who you choose to bring into a position of influence, because they are a key part of what you end up doing with your life. You know? You could live your life with people who are just going to take you further and further astray, rather than support you in what you're doing and really be a part of what you're doing. That's where, again, I think it's quite ideal if you can find people who are like-minded in terms of spiritual practice to be with mostly. But if you're going to be with people who aren't, then you should have a strength of practice that isn't going to succumb to what things they might want to, you know, lead you to do or lead you to think or whatever the case might be. So it does take some discernment on our part. But all of these beings are absolutely the object of our compassion. And especially those who do have the kind of unripe inside, who might be appearing quite nice, or even the opposite, and certainly the ones that are both, you know, not too pleasant on the outside and horrible on the inside, you know, so. I shouldn't be saying it quite like that again, because it makes it sound so static, but everyone is, again, in different degrees of all of this, right? And maybe we even ourselves might float in and out of it. Maybe with certain people, we might act like we're much riper than we are. And other people, you know, we're quite okay being the rightness that we, you know, have inside. So be careful too, how we even might deceive others. But the main point is be careful who you let in, because those people are going to have a strong influence on you. This goes particularly, we're going to have a section, I think it's the next one, that has to do with making sure that we, well, we don't, there's first desire for another's wife, but then there's also the idea of being careful about who we do choose as a partner, whether we call it wife, husband, partner, whatever, spouse. We have to be careful with that person in particular, because that's going to be somebody who's really involved in our life, right? Somebody who you live your life with day in and day out, and they can have a big impact on you. And we know that. I mean, those of us who've been in relationships in our lives know that we are greatly influenced by that person, and the sorts of people that we attract in can have an effect on our behavior. So, let's see this next section. We can start it, I suppose, but this is actually getting into, I think, let's go to the end, what Geshe Sopa does. By the way, in Geshe Sopa's book, we are kind of heading into that chapter, or finishing up that chapter that was the chapter before the way to eliminate desire. It's advice primarily for lay people. So we're getting to the end of chapter 3. And again, as I said, Geshe Sopa, he ends up bringing in the 9th topic. Remember, there are 9 topics under this advice for lay practitioners, householders. He skips the 8th one and goes to the 9th. And so I'm going to do that, and we'll just cover the 9th. It's really quite quick. And again, think as we go through the language on this, because it is about a wife, because this is advice to a king, to someone who identified as male and them having a female partner. Apply it equally the opposite way. I mean, don't think that this is only giving you advice about how women should be looked at in the world or something, because it might come off like that. And I'm just giving you a forewarning so that people don't get too upset. because this is what sometimes happens. These texts are directed often towards men. We are dealing with a patriarchal society even in India at the time of the Buddha, and there certainly was, even within Buddhism, a lot of attention to males in terms of advice given, and advice being flavored in terms of it being given to men and what have you. So let's just read this as taking a proper partner.
Right.
All right. Shun the three kinds of partners who are like a murderess by nature, associating with your enemies, a tyrant, scornful of their partner, and a thief who steals even small articles. So we have three behaviors there that we wouldn't want a partner, regardless of their gender, who is doing these, right? Who's like plotting with our enemies against us. Of course, for a king, this, I guess, is really important, not to have somebody who's going to dethrone you. A tyrant who's very scornful. Again, whatever gender, if you have someone who's scornful of you, that's not obviously an ideal situation. Or someone who's a thief, who's like stealing things from you constantly. So one should avoid the following three kinds of partners. One who by nature becomes involved with their partner's enemies, and thus is like a kind of murderer or murderess, in that through associating with other people, they then wish to kill their spouse. Secondly, one who is like a tyrant, in that they do not honor their partner and act disdainfully towards them. Okay. Then one who is like a thief, in that they steal even small articles, not to mention things of great value. So again, this is just, I don't think we just look at these three as being like the three archetypes that we're trying to avoid: thieves, murderesses, and tyrants. I think the idea is that you want someone who's going to be behaving well towards you and not doing things that are against your welfare. I mean, and that makes sense. Now, again, that's the behavior you also should be exhibiting to your partner, of being concerned about them, not plotting behind their back to overthrow them or whatever. I mean, all these things that we're talking about. This isn't just advice for choosing another person. This is for how you also honor a partner in your life. I think we have to take it that way. Now, this one is where this is where the language gets a little weird. The following verse indicates what sort of person one should espouse. Again, it's going to sound like women because of the analogy that's used. One who is compliant as a sister, again, or brother, someone who's a sibling who can really be compliant in regard to what we want to happen. Dear to the heart like a friend, wishing to help like a parent or mother, and obedient as a servant, should be honored as the family deity. In other words, in India at the time, I guess you had like a family god or goddess or something. So you would want to honor them as if they were that being, that high being. So you adopt a partner compliant as a sibling who accords with their sibling and is not contemptuous of their word. Take a partner who is dear to the heart, like a beloved and courteous friend who is ever pleasing. Marry a partner as desirous of helping their partner as a parent wishing to help their child by freeing them from all physical and mental suffering. And finally, adopt a partner who is obedient, like a servant, in the sense of doing what one bids. Now that so you want, if you're female and you are attracted to someone who's male, then you want that male person to be like that. Okay, make them into the servant. I mean, servant, I think, is kind of a weird word because, we often use this word that we exist really in the Bodhisattva path to serve others. It sounds very different there than to be a servant, right? But to think that I exist to serve others, to be a benefit to them, to help them, to be attentive to what they need on their path of temporal happiness and ultimate happiness, right? That's what we're meaning here by serving, I think. I don't think we should take it as like, do all the chores for me, because I don't want to do them all, Again, that may be what it looks like when we're serving a partner. We may say, well, I want to make sure that I do things to benefit you so that you don't have to do everything yourself.
That part's okay. It's the obedient word that.
The obedient word. Yeah. Compliant and obedient and all these words. Yeah, Maka.
So when was this written?
When was this written? This was written around the 1st century.
Yeah, long time ago.
Over 1900 years ago, quite a while ago. Yeah.
And so, I mean, they're literally talking about servants there.
They may be, but again, I think we can take it in the vein of how we could interpret this same advice in our modern time. I mean, again, the Buddha isn't here Nagarjuna isn't here to give a text or a piece of advice. But in the time of the Buddha, when this king was seeking advice and Nagarjuna was willingly giving his advice, I think he was intending it to be quite specific to that king's situation, which would entail having a woman who, based on the patriarchal stuff that was going on, who was obedient and compliant and all these various things. But I think if we have to look at this advice as how do we, as modern practitioners of Buddhism, accord with this, we say that this is reciprocal for whoever, I mean, regardless of gender, that we want to be the person who is happy to do things for other people, happy to serve them, to benefit them, especially with regard to partners, with people who are very close to us in that way. Yeah, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's just kind of funny language. I mean,
Yeah,
my mother was this little servant to my dad.
right.
That's what she was.
Mhm.
Mine was too.
They all were back then.
They all were.
Yeah, so I mean.
And I think,
Watched his
so
hair.
the comments being made here that, yeah, that this is even in our parents'
Yeah.
lives. They were very much often, the mothers were parents to the father, or were servants to the fathers and obedient to the fathers and all these things. And again, this is a product of the patriarchal culture that we have the karma to have. Going back to our karma, this is a karmic creation. Now, obviously, we're living in times where, although it's not completely gone by any means, there's more sensitivity to this and much more of a desire to have equanimity and equality and people to be seen not according to their gender, but in a much more vast and inclusive way. So I think we have to take the advice in that light, recognizing that yes, at the time it was what was important, was that a king would have a wife, a queen who is like this, who is actually, I have to say my mother was very much a servant to my father, but I never got the feeling that she despised serving in the way that she did. I mean, that's not the feeling that I got. And I'm not saying again that that was a good thing then. I'm just saying that I think we can do this with different frames of mind. And even in our modern culture, we can do it with a different frame of mind of really thinking that I want to really practice my bodhisattva behavior with others. I really want to see how much I can be benefiting the person I'm living with, my partner. I mean, I remember Venerable Rabina once saying to one student, and the student shared it with me, that is how we should see our role with our partners, of like that we're there to care for them. We're there to do what we can to benefit them, to help them, to bring them happiness. And that isn't gender specific. That's for any of us. And so I think there's some sense to that, right? That is how you have a more harmonious relationship. And if both people are doing that, if they're both getting the same advice, well, then they're taking care of each other. I think that's an ideal relationship where there's a lack of self-concern, but it's other directed. My concern is always for the other person. And then I'm the recipient of the other person's concern towards me. Kind of all works out. Yeah.
I see it, my eyes open, so
Uh,
the father would say, well, I'm paying for everything. And
right,
I come home and I'm tired at the end of the day, so,
right, right,
I want you to bring me a beer or
right.
whatever.
And massage my feet.
Yeah, and clean out the spittoon or whatever,
Yeah.
and don't expect me to,
Yeah.
bring you tea in the morning, anything, so it's like,
Right,
like if you are running around the house, like doing these comfort things for the guy who just walked in the door, it's not quite balanced.
right, I understand.
I
So
wonder.
McCaw, for those online, it's just pointing out that, yeah, in her family life, the roles of the two parents was not quite in balance of, the father might be the quote breadwinner, as they used to say, and the mother is the caretaker at home, doing everything that needs to be done and caring for the husband and the children. And again, these are, I mean, the work needs to be done one way or another. My point is that in our modern age, we can find a more evolved way of doing that work and not make it into a contest or something. And people, if again, both partners in a two-person relationship, I should say, I guess, because who knows, there probably are other people in different types of relationships, but if both people have the attitude of wanting to care for the other person, then there's an equal regard for each other. And it's never about, well, why aren't you doing what pleases me? It's like, I want to do what pleases you. And the other person is doing the same to you. I want to do what pleases you. Well, then that's how even society should work ideally, right? Countries should work that way. Countries should say, what can I do for you? And the other one say, well, what can I do for you? Not making it into a power struggle or all the other things that go on. Again, just throwing out some ideas. We can work with this over time. Any final questions before we conclude tonight? I realize we've gone just a little bit over. Sorry about that. So again, we've jumped forward just because that's what Geshe Sopa also does. So we are going to enter into one of the longer sections in terms of the commentary of this text. And that's this 8th point that has to do with, it starts off with kind of eschewing, probably I think it was another eschewing, the desire for another's wife or another's partner. It starts off there, but again, it gets into a whole discussion of the delusions and the afflictions and the root of ignorance that's behind all of this. So we're going to get into these heavy-duty topics to some degree in this text, especially into the teachings on the wisdom of emptiness. So just know that that's coming up, and there's a chapter that I would encourage you to read that kind of begins this exploration. It doesn't finish it because it's finished in the next chapter, chapter 5. If you can read chapter 4 of Geshe Sopa's book, or at least start to read it, it will be helpful just to sort of set the stage, and it might even help you find what questions you might have about this topic of, how to actually get rid of the delusions. It's going to talk initially about kind of not quite suppressing, it uses the word suppressing, but trying to keep the delusions from arising in a manifest way. But then it goes on to talk about, but we really want to ideally get rid of them once and for all, right? Get rid of our attachment, get rid of our anger. And of course, that involves the wisdom teachings, because that's the mechanism by which you do that. So this is an important section, and I want to do justice to it, but I also think I'm going to ask you all to do something from your side of kind of reading the book if you can have access to it. And then that way we'll kind of go through this exploration together. I won't be able to touch on everything Geshe Sopa goes into because he covers quite a bit, but he's also following. Remember that in this book, he is following the commentary by Venerable Rendawa that we're using. So we're going to be looking at many of the points he raises, but I probably won't have time to discuss them as extensively. But then we get through that, and I think it's kind of more or less smooth sailing for the rest of the book. I mean, there's lots of little interesting tidbits and what have you. And I think emptiness does come up again, but nonetheless, this is the more involved discussion where Venerable Rendawa takes this opportunity to go through several pages of commentary on how to remove the delusions. So that's a little preview. Then before we conclude, I might also mention that I won't be here physically again until March 21st, 3 weeks from tonight. Because I'm going to California on Saturday. I will teach from California next Thursday. So there won't be teaching in the Gampa, but it'll be everyone online Zoom. If by chance something comes up and I don't get a good connection, I'll be at Vajrapani Institute. They don't have, I think they've improved their online capability. And so I should be able to get online and give you the teaching. If something happens, because they are getting a lot of weather out in California too, if something happens and it's impossible for me to get online, then John or someone will let you know, that things are, Sarah, somebody to, but hopefully it'll all work fine. The following Thursday after that, no teaching, that's the 14th. And then again, the 21st, I'll be back here in person. So, all right. Thank you for your patience tonight. Let's go ahead, Mary, if you can get the prayers on the screen.
Oh, should we do the list?
Oh, the list, yes. Jenna's going to read the list first. Sorry, I forgot about that.
We're going to dedicate the merit created tonight to those experiencing obstacles, specifically Gina, Robin C., Yvonne, Joaquin, Margie, Jana, Cern B, Dia, Elsu, Asa, and children, Ginny, Matt, Jeff, Laura, and Alyssa. Also to those experiencing illness, specifically Jane, Rolf Dubler, Joanne, Rosemarie, Elena, Ken, Clara, Yvonne, Don, John, Margie, Rosemary, Patty, Bill, Yvonne, Amata, Jenny L, and Alex. And for those who have died in the last 49 days, we dedicate for Eve Dubler, John Else, Man Who Jumped, Bill Woodall, Bonnie B, Norm, Cody, Mummy Max, Adam Cook, and Helen Gotts.
Goats,
Goats.
sorry. GOTZ, I think pronounce it goats. That's
Goats,
my mother's
okay.
family.
Goats.
Romero as well.
Oh, Elio Romero as well, yes.
Any other names from folks online?
You did say Mummy Max, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and then we'll get the prayers on and we'll be blessing them soon.
General dedication prayer. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
Oh, Aaron Bushnell, to add to deaths. He's the Marine who self-immolated at the Israeli embassy
Right.
this week.
What was this? I didn't hear this.
There was a Marine who protested the war in Gaza, and then the Israelis' handling of that by self-immolating in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington,
He was
D.C.
an American Marine.
Yes, yes.
Dear.
Okay.
Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. Who do the incomparably kind times and beyond, so I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Otsulhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially west, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request, O Lama, please lead us along. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Prabhakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Buddha's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge. And from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for the fortunate disciples.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jenna, for reading those prayers. So again, we dedicate also for the good health and long lives of all of our other precious gurus, so that we will never be parted from gurus in all our lifetimes, all the way through to enlightenment. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dhamma.